Hello and welcome to Top Linux Tech. This is the beginning of the new series of Linux tutorial lessons aimed for beginners and those who are already familiar with Linux. The purpose of this course is to deliver basic and advanced skill levels to those interested in learning about Linux regardless of their goal, whether that's personal or professional goal. This course aims to deliver best of both worlds, and it will be separated in basic and advanced lessons suitable for everyone. During the course of the beginner lessons, we will be working with Debian/Ubuntu based operating system known as Linux Mint, as this is the most user-friendly and easiest Linux distribution for beginners to start exploring the operating system and the entire free software ecosystem. Later on, in the more advanced lessons, we will be going into the details of other distributions as well and cover plenty of other topics tied to the operating system. Before we dive into the video series, I'd like to give you a brief piece of history about how the Linux operating system came into existence. It all began a long time ago, at the end of the 60s and early 1970s, inside the company known as AT&T, or the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. During these years, an old and very complex project known as Multics came to an end. It was then reborn as a new project known as UNIX, which was an operating system conceived and implemented by two engineers from the AT&T Bell Laboratories, Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie. Ritchie is also the creator of the C programming language, in which Unix was later completely rewritten and made to be portable. Unix, in its design, had a beautiful philosophy. It was the Unix way of doing things, which states that you write one program and it does one thing really well. That was the idea, along with the incredible efficiency of programs, where you can take the output of one program and use that as an input source of another program by the use of system pipes. Due to its efficiency, simplicity, popularity, and portability, Unix was licensed to other companies and further divided into several branches of other commercially available Unix operating systems, like AT&T System 5, IBM's iX, HP UX, Sun Solaris, Microsoft Xenix, and a few others that came later, like Apple's macOS as we know it today. However, there was one distribution of Unix that was not commercial, which was further developed in the University of California in Berkeley, which was known as BSD Unix, or Berkeley Software Distribution. So basically, there were two major flavors of Unix available and their derivatives. One was the AT&T System 5, and the other was BSD. It is also interesting to point out that the networking stack was developed on BSD first and then made its way into System 5 branch later. Many things happened that weren't in favor of BSD, and this led to the Unix wars, in which AT&T filed a lawsuit against Berkeley University, and BSD was forced to purge all of its proprietary code, which belonged to the AT&T, and completely rewrite their operating system from scratch. However, due to licensing policy, it could no longer be called Unix, but simply a Unix-like operating system. Today, the BSD operating system is known as FreeBSD. Years later, in 1983, Richard Stallman started the GNU project. Its goal was creating a free and open source Unix-like operating system. An operating system that works, behaves, and emulates Unix, but without any proprietary code, and a system that's not going to be called Unix, but basically be a clone of Unix. The GNU project almost had all of the necessary components to build an operating system, such as the shell, compilers, and libraries. Everything, except one thing: the system's kernel. The GNU project started working on a Unix-like kernel, which they called Herd. However, it was incomplete and still in early stages of development. Later, in 1991, a Finnish computer science student named Linus Torvalds started a hobby project with the goal to write its own Unix-like kernel. This project was later known as the Linux kernel. From a project that was just a hobby, it quickly turned out to be a serious one, and a project that perfectly fit into the GNU puzzle. Now the GNU project finally had a working kernel, and this is how the two projects came together, forming the GNU/Linux operating system, or just Linux as people prefer to call it. This is how Linux was born, and since its inception, it quickly gained popularity and took dominance in the today's server industry infrastructure, replacing Unix and other operating systems. The Linux kernel is also used to drive the Google's Android operating system on mobile phones and tablets. On desktops, however, Linux is slowly gaining more popularity these days, especially now that more applications are being ported and the operating system is becoming much easier to use. Due to the popularity and freedom of Linux, it quickly was adopted by many, and this is how the Linux distributions, or simply distros, came into existence. A distribution is a collection of software necessary to build a Linux operating system built by a company or an organization, thus allowing Linux to enter into the commercial and the public domain. Today, there are hundreds of Linux distributions, but the most popular ones are Debian, Red Hat, OpenSUSE, and Arch, which serve as a basis for other Linux distributions. Linux Mint, for example, is based on Ubuntu, which in turn is based on Debian, and the major difference between the various Linux distros is mainly the package manager, the software that they come bundled with, and customizations, while the rest of the components are actually the same. So, in a nutshell, what is Linux? GNU/Linux is a free and open source Unix-like operating system available for a wide range of computing devices. Unlike other operating systems that are proprietary and have the source code locked, the advantage of Linux is that anyone can modify and improve its source code at will. The operating system and the rest of the free software ecosystem allows anyone to use it without any restrictions. This is why projects like these grow fast and are not limited to the development of only one company, but freedom where the entire world contributes for the betterment of the entire ecosystem. Anyway, with all that being said, let's move to the first part of this video series, which is installing Linux inside a virtual machine. For this purpose, and as a best learning tool for beginners, I have chosen Linux Mint. For the virtualization software, I have chosen VirtualBox, which is a nice tool that allows you to test any operating system without having to reinstall your existing system or do any damage. So let's get into the video now. To install VirtualBox, navigate to virtualbox.org, click on Downloads, and then download the latest version of the software for your operating system. In this demonstration, I'm going to choose VirtualBox for Windows. Also, download the extensions pack from the down below link and save that to your computer as well. When the download has finished, start the installation of VirtualBox and make sure you install the additional USB drivers when the dialog prompt appears. When the installation is complete, start the program, click on Preferences, go to the Extensions tab, and install the additional extensions pack that you have previously downloaded. To get the latest version of Linux Mint, go to linuxmint.com, click on Download, and then scroll to the bottom to see the available versions. Each version comes with a different desktop environment. However, in this case, due to the limited performance of the VirtualBox hypervisor, we will be using a very lightweight desktop environment known as XFCE. So make sure you download that one. Choose a mirror that is closest to your location and wait for the download to finish. Okay, so let's create our first virtual machine right now. To do that, click on the New button and simply give it a name. I'll name it Linux Mint. And as you can see, Ubuntu 64-bit has been already pre-selected as the Linux version, which is completely fine because Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu anyway, and I'll click on Next. Now the recommended memory size is 1 GB, but I would recommend that you go with 2 or at least 4 GB of memory. So I'll change the value here to 4096 megabytes and click Next. I'll click Create to create a virtual disk right now. For the file type, the default selection is fine, which is the VDI or VirtualBox disk image. So click on Next. And for the storage type, we can choose if we want to use dynamically allocated hard disk file, which actually costs no space to create, and the file creation is immediate. However, the disk performance will be a little bit slow because the virtual disk will slowly grow and expand over time as you write more data to it. Or you can choose the fixed size, which will actually take some time to create the file. However, the disk performance will be much faster because all of the available space will be pre-allocated in advance. For this demonstration, I'll simply go with the dynamically allocated and click on Next. You can make your choice anyhow you like, it doesn't matter. And now here you will have to select the file location and the size. And for this demonstration, I will actually use 64 gigabytes of size and click on Create. Okay, and now after we have created our virtual machine, we actually want to change some settings before we start the virtual machine for the first time. So go ahead and click this settings button. And right here under the general section, click the advanced tab and enable bidirectional for both shared clipboard and drag and drop. And basically this will enable you to share some data between the host and the guest operating system, such as clipboard history or some files and folders that you might actually want to copy between the two operating systems. Next, click the System section and enable the EFI option here. Now every modern computer BIOS today operates in EFI mode, and this is the exact mode that we want to emulate within the virtual machine. So make sure that this option is selected. Next, click the Processor tab and give the CPU at least 2 CPU cores and enable the physical address extensions here. So tick this box. Next, choose the display section and give the virtual video adapter some more memory. So I'll bump this up to 128 megabytes and also enable the 3D acceleration down here. Now under the network section, I'm actually going to change the network adapter to be bridged adapter because I want to expose the virtual machine to our local network as if it were a separate computer on the network. So make sure you select bridged and then finally click OK. Everything looks fine, so let's start the VM right now. Click on Start. And to select the startup disk, we'll have to use one of the bootable ISOs that we have just downloaded previously. So click on this yellow folder icon. And let's actually add an ISO image. Click on Add. And select the Linux Mint XFC 64-bit. Click Open. Click Choose. And click on Start. We click on the Start Linux Mint 20 64-bit, press Enter, and the system will automatically boot inside the live installation environment. When you get to the desktop, double-click the Install Linux Mint icon, and this will open up the installer. Choose your language, click Continue, choose the keyboard layout that you want to use. English US is completely fine in this case, so click Continue. Also tick this option to install all of the multimedia codecs. And now we come to the part where we actually have to create and define some partitions where the operating system will be installed. So we can go with the first option, which is actually automatic, and it will create all the necessary partitions that are needed for the operating system to be installed. So if we click here Install Now, the disk partition utility will actually create two partitions. The first will be the boot EFI partition, and the second partition will be actually the partition for the operating system and all the files within. So, you might be wondering how to create these partitions yourself, because obviously you'd like to learn. Well, I'm glad you asked. So, let's click on Go Back, and we will choose something else. So, click Continue. And right here we see our device name, which is /dev/SDA, which is our virtual disk. Now, before we use this disk, we'll actually have to create a new partition table. So click here on the New Partition Table button, click Continue, and you'll see that a new partition table has been created with a size of 68,719 megabytes. Now this is all of the available free space that we can use to create our desired partitions, so make sure that the free space is selected and click on the plus icon here. And we are ready to create our first partition, which should always be the boot partition when you are working in EFI mode. So here for the size, 500 megabytes is quite sufficient for the boot partition, and for the type we actually have to select EFI system partition. So click on that, the type should be primary, and the location should be beginning of the free space. So click OK. So under the SDA tree, we see that the first partition has been created, and it's named SDA1 and the type is EFI, so far so good. So click the free space again, click on the plus to add the second partition, And in this case, this will be the operating system partition. So for the size, 24,000 megabytes or 24 gigabytes is completely sufficient for this purpose. Again, the type should be primary and the location should be the beginning of this space. For the type, we will go with the ext4 file system, which is one of the file systems available that you can use to format Linux partitions. And for the mount point, we will simply select /. This mount point is used for the root file system or the file system that is used for the operating system partition. So click OK. And as you can see, SDA2 has been created as the ext4 type, and the mount point is /, or the root file system. And finally, let's add one more partition, which will serve as the partition containing the user data or the home folders of every user. So click on the free space again and on the plus sign. And let's actually use all of the available and remaining disk space for the home partition. For the file system type, we'll choose ext4 again. And for the mount point, we'll select /home. And click OK. The bootloader should normally be installed on the SDA virtual disk. So we'll leave this setting as the default and click Install Now. We are asked if we are satisfied with the partition layout that we have just specified, and then simply click Continue. Choose your time zone or location, click Continue. For the name, you can type your username or any name you like. In this case, I'll simply type top Linux tech. I'm going to name my computer Mintbox. You can use any name you like. Now for the username, I'll simply call it TLT. And for the password, simply type your desired password. I'll keep this simple and simply assign a short and memorable password because this virtual machine is only for demonstrating and learning purposes, so it doesn't pose any risk whatsoever. However, if this were a real system, you would actually have to choose a more complicated password, because choosing short and weak passwords is a huge security risk. So once you are done, simply click Continue. And now sit back and relax while the operating system is being installed. And once the installation is done, simply click on the Restart Now button. Press Enter to remove the virtual ISO file that we have just used to install the operating system. And that's it. And if everything worked correctly, you'll be greeted by this login screen. So simply type in your username password that you have assigned during the installation process and press Enter. And right after logging in, you'll be greeted by this welcome screen, which actually contains some nice documentation that you might want to check out sometime. For now, I'm simply going to close this off and install some drivers that are necessary for this virtual machine to operate properly. So let's click Devices option here on the VirtualBox and select Insert Guest Addition CD Image. Now once the CD is inserted, simply right-click here on an empty space and choose Open in Terminal. Let's actually make this a little bit bigger so you can read the information on the screen much better. And let's start the installation process by typing in sudo space dot / vbox linux additions dot run. And by the way, you can just press tab to autocomplete the command, just like that. And also pay attention that the command is also case sensitive. So you will have to type in these capital letters that you see on the screen exactly as they are shown. Simply press enter and provide your user password. And wait until the guest additions are installed into the system. Once this is done, simply close the terminal window, eject the virtual ISO from the system, click on the Start menu here and choose Restart. Let's log in again. And now, once the VirtualBox additions have been installed, you can simply resize this window and get the proper screen resolution. Okay, so before we do anything else, let's actually enable file and folder sharing between the host and the guest operating system, because you would obviously want to share some data, like files and folders, between the two systems. First, we need to actually assign our user to be a member of the VirtualBox group. To do that, open up the terminal and simply type in the command sudo usermod -a capital G vbox sf and then type in your username. In my case, this is TLT, and press enter. Give in the password. Close the terminal. And now click here in the VirtualBox options where it says devices. Point to shared folders and select shared folder settings. Click machine folders. Click on the plus icon and simply add any folder of your choice from the host operating system. So I'll choose this one, VM1. Select folder, click auto mount and click make permanent. Then click OK. Finally, restart your virtual machine. Log in into the system again. And now we should have file sharing enabled. So let's check if everything works correctly. Open up the file manager. And right here in the upper left corner of the screen, you will see that your shared folder is now mounted. So let's click on that. And there we go. We have successfully enabled file and folder sharing between the two operating systems. Let's actually try to create a new folder here. Let's call it test. Create. Let's now check into the host system to see if the folder has been created. And yes, it has. So everything seems fine. And also drag and drop should be working as well. So let's test that. So I'm gonna grab this README file and drag it right into the virtual machine and paste it here. So yes, it works. By the way, dragging and dropping files is not always the ideal solution because sometimes it might not work as intended. Therefore, I always suggest that you use the file sharing option instead. Now, clipboard history should also work, so let's try it out. So I'm gonna copy this text and try to create a new document here. Let's create an empty file, call it 123, and let's see what happens when we paste the information. And yes, clipboard sharing works perfectly fine. Okay, regarding screen resolution, you can always minimize or maximize the window, and this will automatically set the correct resolution. You can also enable the full screen mode, which is the host key plus F, and the host key is usually the right control on the keyboard. So let's test that. Press right control and F, and this will bring us into full screen mode. If we press the combination again, right control plus F, it will take us back out of the full screen mode. Let's finish the system setup now. If you notice down here at the taskbar, you'll see the notification bell and you will see some notification checks. It says some system reports require your attention. So let's click on that to see what's going on. So the system tells us that there are some language packs that are missing and require installation. So let's click on install the language packs. Click continue. Provide your user password. And we're done. And by the way, in your case, you might not have to do this. It all depends on your language settings and location that you have selected during the installation process. So let's close this. And finally, let's click here on the shield icon in the taskbar, which is the update manager. It is notifying us that there are probably some new updates that can be installed. So let's do that. Let's click on OK. If the update manager asks you to switch to a local mirror, you should click on yes, because you want to select an update server that is closest to your location. So type in your password. And let's choose the proper mirror for installing our updates. So here for the main mirror, I'm going to click this one and simply choose the one that has the best speed available. In my case, this is this one, Evo Wise CDN. So I'm going to choose that one, click apply, and do the same for the base. Configuration changed, click OK. Wait until the database cache is being updated. Let's close that. And now the system tells us that a new version of the update manager is available, so we should first update the program itself. So let's click on apply the update. And finally, you can see all of the packages that have newer versions and which can be updated. So let's go ahead and click install updates. Click OK. Type in your password again. Now the update process will probably take some time, so sit back and relax while it is running. When the updates are finished, simply restart the virtual machine. Okay, so far so good. So let's now actually finalize some settings and also customize a few things from the control panel. So to access it, click here on the menu, choose the settings manager, and let's, for example, maybe change the theme and the icons. So there are plenty of themes that you can choose that come pre-installed with the Linux Mint. Let's actually go with Mint Aqua, and let's do the same for the icons. Let's go back to all settings. Let's click on the desktop here to change our wallpaper. Let's choose maybe this one. Click all settings again. Maybe you would like to change some settings related to the keyboard and the mouse, for example. Maybe you're left-handed or right-handed, so maybe you'd like a greater acceleration speed or sensitivity. So you can define all of that here. Next, if you're someone that uses multiple languages, you can define those settings here. So click on Languages. And in my case, I'm going to choose a different settings for the time format and the system locale. I'll keep the language to English. And I'm actually going to change the system locale settings to apply system-wide, because I want these settings to be valid for every new user that I add into the system. Now notice the driver manager here. So let's click on that. Now this is a virtual machine, so you don't really have to use it because there's nothing to configure. However, if this was a real system, then you would have to install video card drivers through this interface. For example, maybe you would have an AMD or NVIDIA card that needs proper drivers, so you would find them and select them here from the driver manager. So let's close it right now. Now, before the end of this video, I would actually like to talk about VirtualBox snapshots. These snapshots are useful if, for example, you would want to make changes to the virtual machine and then revert those changes back if you've made a mistake or accidentally damaged the system in any way. I always recommend that you save a snapshot when the virtual machine is off, so let me show you. So for example, I'm going to create here a new folder and let's call it test. And then I'm going to turn off the virtual machine. So I'll choose shutdown. So let's click here on the menu, choose snapshots, and then simply click on take snapshot. We can give it any name we want. And we can also type in the description. Click OK. Now let's start the virtual machine again. Now imagine for a moment that this test folder is actually a very important folder that contains some data that we need, and we have accidentally deleted it. Luckily, we have a saved snapshot that we can use to revert back to the previous state and restore our deleted folder. So let's shut down the machine again. Click on the test snapshot that we have just previously created. Click Restore. Make sure you deselect this option because this will create another additional snapshot of the current state, and in this case we don't want that. Now click Restore and finally click on Start again. And we see that our folder is now back. Now, regarding snapshots, you can save any number of snapshots of the current state. However, you must always pay attention of the order in which they are saved, with taking notes of the snapshot description and the time they were taken. If you have multiple snapshots, you can of course choose which one you would like to restore, which one you would like to delete, and which one you would like to keep. This is the end of this video, and in the next part we will discuss about installing and removing software from the official repository through the use of the graphical user interface and the command line. I hope this video was informative for you, and if you have enjoyed it, please subscribe, comment, like, and share.